whether you're voted, this is my thing, whether I'm voted or whether I'm not, I'm still happy to be considered. But as I was saying earlier, I'd rather have another championship ring. I just like to be a winner. It means a lot for people to play.
How good was Dennis Johnson? That is the question you are asking when you see this thumbnail with Michael Jordan and Larry Bird on a split screen, and Dennis Johnson right there in the middle. Because the answer cannot be found in box scores or highlight reels or any traditional metric used to measure greatness in the sport. When you look at Dennis Johnson's career statistics, nothing immediately jumps off the page at you in the traditional sense. He was never an MVP. He was never a scoring champion. He did not lead the league in anything flashy or obvious. His numbers do not scream superstar the way the era's offensive giants did. On the surface, his resume looks respectable but not dominant. But the real story of Dennis Johnson is not a story told through statistics on a page. It is a story told by the three men who completely defined the entire 1980s and shaped modern basketball forever. When Larry Bird, Earvin Magic Johnson, and Michael Jordan were each asked about the players who shaped their careers and their legacies, Dennis Johnson kept appearing in their answers, over and over again from different eras and different perspectives and different contexts. Bird said he was the best player he ever played with. Magic said he was the greatest defensive player he ever faced. Jordan made a point to challenge him directly as the benchmark of defensive excellence. That is the real measure of greatness in basketball, not what the statistics say, what the greatest players say. This is the foundation of the story. If you are already sensing where this is going, hit the hype feature right now and hype this video, because Dennis Johnson's story is about to show you something most people completely miss about basketball. The legends all knew something that the world forgot. They understood the real difference between being a star and being a winner. Stars get made by highlight reels and box scores and media narratives. Winners get identified by the people they share the floor with. Winners get respected by their peers. This is the core lesson of Dennis Johnson's story and legacy. Number 1. Michael Jordan targeted Dennis Johnson as the player he absolutely had to prove himself against. The story begins with a game of golf the day before one of the most legendary playoff performances in all of NBA history. Jordan played golf with Danny Ainge, who was a guard for the Boston Celtics. As the story goes, Ainge and his partner won the game, beating Jordan pretty decisively and taking some money off him in the process. When they dropped Jordan off at the end of the day, he was upset and competitive. He did not like losing at anything, even golf. He looked at them and said something that would echo through the arena the very next night. He said, "Tell your boy DJ I got something for him tomorrow." DJ Dennis Johnson, not Bird, not the Celtics team, not anyone else, just DJ. This single statement reveals everything about Jordan's mentality and competitive nature. It shows who Jordan really feared. That one moment tells you everything about how Jordan's competitive mind worked and operated. Jordan did not single out the biggest star on the floor for a challenge. He did not call out Bird, even though Bird was arguably the greatest forward ever to play the game. Jordan identified Dennis Johnson as the person he absolutely had to get past and break. The benchmark, the standard. The alpha defender who controlled how teams played on the perimeter and set the tone for defensive intensity. Jordan understood that if he could break DJ's defense, he could break Boston completely. If he could expose DJ's limitations, he could prove he was the best player alive in the world. This was the ultimate respect from the greatest player ever to live and play the game. The next night, on April 20th, 1986, Jordan did something that nobody had ever done before in NBA playoff history. He scored 63 points against the Boston Celtics in a double overtime playoff game. 63 points. The game became instantly legendary. It is remembered as the moment Michael Jordan arrived as a superstar, the moment he proved himself against the best team and the best defense in basketball. But when you look closely at what actually happened during that game, something very interesting emerges. Dennis Johnson's reputation survived it completely intact. Here are the facts that most people never talk about when they discuss the game. Jordan took 41 shots that game. Out of those 41 attempts, only 3 were completely uncontested. 3 shots total. That means Dennis Johnson and the Celtics defense had their hands in Jordan's face for 38 of those shots. DJ was in position correctly. He had a hand up. He was doing his job correctly. Jordan simply made shots that nobody else in basketball could possibly make. He shot pull-up jumpers and fadeaway shots with contact and difficulty. He made 22 of those 41 attempts. That is not a failure of defense at all. That is a demonstration of genius-level offensive skill and competitive excellence that transcends any defensive scheme known to basketball. The Celtics' game plan was not even to stop Jordan completely. It was to stop everyone else. Let Michael score his points, cut off his teammates, make sure nobody else gets comfortable, make sure nobody else gets easy baskets. And it worked perfectly. Orlando Woolridge, the second leading scorer for Chicago, only had 24 points. The Celtics won the game 135 to 131. Dennis Johnson played 44 minutes that night. He scored 15 points. He provided the leadership and the mental toughness that allowed Boston to absorb the Jordan explosion and still come out with the victory. This was a masterclass in strategic defense. What happened after the game is also very telling about DJ's character and mentality. There are accounts that suggest Dennis Johnson was frustrated by the loss. Some reports suggest he pinned the stat sheet to the shower wall, using it as motivation for the next time they faced off. But here is the important thing. Jordan had just scored 63 points, one of the greatest offensive displays ever produced in playoff basketball. And Dennis Johnson's response was not panic or shame or embarrassment. It was not doubt. It was defiance and confidence. He treated it like any other game, any other assignment. This old guard confidence is what Jordan actually respected about him. In an era where most players were already intimidated by Air Jordan, Dennis Johnson treated him like just another job, just another night on the court. Years later, Jordan would cite Dennis Johnson as one of the few defenders who played him hard and physical without ever being dirty or crossing the line. DJ used leverage and strength. He made Jordan work for every single inch of space. When Larry Bird said after that game that Jordan was God disguised as Michael Jordan, he was acknowledging that the Celtics, and specifically Dennis Johnson, had done everything humanly possible to slow him down. It did not work, but that failure did not damage DJ's status. It actually elevated it. If the best defender in the world could not stop Michael Jordan, nobody could. This is the common thread that ties together all three legends' respect for Dennis Johnson. Each of them, in their own way, faced an immovable force in DJ. This is what made him truly great. Number 2, Magic Johnson faced Dennis Johnson as a rival and opponent, and it became one of the defining matchups of the entire decade. The respect that Magic held for Dennis Johnson was rooted in genuine frustration and deep respect. Magic has gone on record with a very clear statement about Dennis Johnson. He said, "As far as I'm concerned, DJ was the greatest defensive player I've ever played against." This is not a casual or friendly compliment. This is high praise coming from someone who faced the absolute elite. Magic Johnson was not someone who easily admitted limitations or weakness. Magic Johnson faced every elite defender of the 1980s. He played against Sidney Moncrief, who was a 2-time Defensive Player of the Year. He played against Maurice Cheeks. He played against Alvin Robertson. He practiced every single day against Michael Cooper, who won Defensive Player of the Year in 1987. And yet, when asked to name the supreme obstacle of his entire career, he chose Dennis Johnson. This decision was not made lightly or carelessly. The reason goes way deeper than simple athleticism or size or speed. Magic said that while other defenders were athletic, Dennis Johnson was smart. He challenged Magic's mind, not just his body. He made Magic think. He made Magic second-guess himself. The 1984 NBA Finals is the series where this matchup reached its absolute peak. The Los Angeles Lakers came into that series as heavy favorites. Magic was already a 2-time Finals MVP. He was the best offensive player in the entire league. The Lakers had won the championship just 2 years earlier. Everyone expected Magic to completely dominate, but the Boston Celtics made one crucial adjustment that changed everything about the series. Coach K.C. Jones put Dennis Johnson on Magic Johnson. This move would define the entire series and change basketball history. On paper, this looked like a huge mismatch. Magic stood 6 feet 9 inches tall. Dennis Johnson was 6 feet 4 inches. According to traditional basketball logic, you put a bigger player on the bigger guard. You do not put a smaller man on Magic. But the Celtics figured something out that nobody else had grasped. The bigger forwards could not stay in front of Magic. They were not quick enough to slide their feet. The smaller guards were too weak to hold their ground when Magic backed them down. Dennis Johnson was the answer because he had something nobody else had in the same combination. He had a low center of gravity. He had immense lower body strength. He had quick hands. And he had a basketball brain that was elite. This combination was lethal. Dennis Johnson's defensive strategy against Magic Johnson was relentless and very creative in its execution. He picked Magic up at the 94-foot line before Magic even received the ball. He did not let Magic walk the ball up the court casually. Instead, DJ used his body to bump and harass Magic, forcing him to turn his back to the basket, just to protect the basketball from being stripped. This took away Magic's rhythm from the very start of the possession. When Magic tried to back DJ down in the post, Dennis Johnson would hold his ground and then suddenly pull back. This move is called pulling the chair. Magic would fall forward. He would lose his balance. He would have to reset the entire play and start over. But the real genius was cognitive and mental in nature. Dennis Johnson knew the Lakers' plays intimately. He had studied film for hours. He knew where Magic wanted to pass. He anticipated the passing lanes before they developed. By denying those options, he forced Magic to think. He forced Magic to adjust his decisions. He forced Magic to use mental energy just to process what was happening on the court at that moment. And in the NBA Finals, when games are decided by single possessions and critical moments, mental fatigue matters enormously. Magic said that Dennis Johnson made it impossible to play a mistake-free game. That is not an insult. That is respect from one great competitor to another. The 1984 Finals were brutal for Magic Johnson, and Dennis Johnson was the primary reason for the difficulty. Let us look at specific moments that defined this series and shaped its outcome. In Game 2, with the game tied in the final seconds of regulation, Magic dribbled the basketball and let the shot clock expire completely. He did not get a shot off. He just dribbled it out. The game went to overtime, and the Celtics won convincingly. This mental lapse happened because Dennis Johnson had beaten him down the entire game, wearing on him physically and mentally. The exhaustion was mental and physical combined. Dennis Johnson's defense was systematic and relentless. In Game 4, Magic made a bad pass that was stolen by Robert Parrish. Later in overtime, Magic missed 2 critical free throws that could have changed the game. These are not normal mistakes for Magic Johnson. He was the best playoff performer of his generation, but Dennis Johnson had spent 50 minutes straight harassing him, denying him space, making him think about every single option. Game 7 was even worse for Magic. That game, Magic committed 7 turnovers. 7 in one game. He finished with 16 points and 15 assists, which sounds decent statistically, but the turnovers were absolutely catastrophic. Dennis Johnson forced Magic into traffic, where he was stripped of the basketball or forced into bad decisions. The Celtics won the title, Boston won, and Magic Johnson was labeled a choker by the media. He was devastated by what happened. Magic has said that he cried for 3 months after that series ended. Not because he lost the series, not because the Lakers fell short of expectations, but because he realized through playing against Dennis Johnson that he was not as good as he thought he was as a player. That series was his mirror. Dennis Johnson showed him his own limits and exposed weaknesses he did not know he had. The respect between these two players transcended the rivalry and competition. The Lakers and Celtics had genuine animosity in the 1980s. Hard fouls, heated moments, real dislike and tension. But when Dennis Johnson announced his retirement in 1990, Magic Johnson sent a telegram to the Celtics locker room. The message was simple but historic. Magic called Dennis Johnson the best backcourt defender of all time. Think about that statement. This is coming from a man who faced everyone, and his final word on Dennis Johnson was simply the best. This gesture speaks volumes about how Magic truly felt about Dennis Johnson as a competitor and rival. Despite all the intensity and competitiveness, Magic recognized DJ's greatness. This telegram is perhaps the highest compliment Magic could ever give to a rival. Number 3, Larry Bird considered Dennis Johnson his best teammate ever, and that statement carries huge weight because Bird played with Kevin McHale and Robert Parrish. Bird played alongside arguably the most unstoppable low-post scorer in the entire history of basketball. He played with a 9-time All-Star center. Yet in his autobiography and in countless interviews over the years, Bird elevated Dennis Johnson above all of them. Bird said simply, "Dennis makes me better." This is not a comment about statistics or individual accolades. This is about how the game actually works at the highest level of competition. To understand why Bird made this choice, you have to understand what Bird was as a player and competitor at the highest level. Larry Bird was not just a scorer or someone who put the ball in the basket. He was a basketball savant. He saw the game in 4 dimensions. He understood angles and spacing and defensive rotations before his body could move into position. He anticipated plays before they happened. He solved problems on the court instantly. For a player with that kind of basketball mind and intelligence, the greatest frustration was having teammates who could not see what he saw. Bird needed people who knew where to be without being told. He needed players who understood the geometry of basketball the same way he did. Throughout his career, despite playing with talented teammates, Bird often felt isolated in his basketball intelligence. Yes, McHale and Parrish were Hall of Famers. Yes, they were great players, but they did not think like Bird thought. They did not process the game the way Bird processed it. Then in 1983, the Celtics made a trade. They sent a center named Rick Roby to the Phoenix Suns in exchange for Dennis Johnson. This trade was met with skepticism from many people. Dennis Johnson had a reputation that preceded him around the league. He was moody. He had clashed with coaches in Seattle under Lenny Wilkels. He had clashed with coaches in Phoenix under John McLeod. The basketball world saw him as a difficult personality. Cancerous, they said. A headache in the locker room? A problem to deal with. But Larry Bird saw something completely different from everyone else. Bird saw a competitor. Bird saw someone who had already won a Finals MVP in 1979 with the Seattle Supersonics. Bird saw a player with defensive tenacity that matched his own. Bird saw someone who cared about winning so much that he fought with coaches about it, and Bird immediately embraced him. Bird understood that DJ's demands were really about excellence. The friction Dennis Johnson had created in other cities was not because he was a bad person or a bad teammate. It was because he was relentlessly demanding about winning and excellence. He wanted accountability. He wanted intensity. He demanded that level from everyone around him. He did not accept mediocrity from himself or others, and that perfectly matched Larry Bird's own pathological competitiveness. It was not a clash of personalities. It was a meeting of minds. Bird knew that the attitude problems were irrelevant if the player contributed to winning, and Dennis Johnson absolutely contributed to winning. The chemistry that developed between Bird and Johnson was unlike anything else on that Celtics team during the era. The signature play of the Bird-Johnson era was something called the backdoor cut. In the Celtics' offensive system, Bird often operated from the high post or from the wing. A normal guard might stand in place and wait for the ball to come to him passively. Dennis Johnson was completely different from typical guards. He constantly read the eyes of his defender with intense focus and precision. If the defender turned his head to look at Bird, Dennis Johnson would instantly cut to the basket at full speed. Bird, anticipating this cut, would deliver the pass. Often, Bird did not even have to look. He just knew where Dennis Johnson would be. This required no verbal communication. There was no pointing or yelling or hand signals. This was a silent understanding of space and time and rhythm. This was two basketball geniuses operating on the same wavelength. This was telepathy. Bird said that he knew Dennis Johnson would be cutting. There was no doubt, no hesitation, just complete trust. That level of trust is rare in professional sports. That is why Bird valued Dennis Johnson above more statistically gifted players. Dennis Johnson also provided something else that mattered deeply to Bird. On the defensive end, Bird had to expend enormous energy guarding elite perimeter threats. He had to help on defense when other guards were overmatched. That took away from what Bird could do offensively. Dennis Johnson changed that completely. Every night, Dennis Johnson took the assignment of the opposing team's best guard. Whether it was Magic Johnson or Isaiah Thomas or Sidney Moncrief, Dennis Johnson took the toughest defensive job every single night. This freed Bird to focus his energy on offense and on team defense. Bird could play free and aggressive knowing DJ had the toughest perimeter player covered. This was worth more than any stat line. The ultimate manifestation of the Bird-Johnson connection came in Game 5 of the 1987 Eastern Conference Finals. The Boston Celtics were playing the Detroit Pistons. With 5 seconds left in the game, the score was incredibly close. The Celtics needed to win to take the series back. Isaiah Thomas threw an inbound pass to try to save the game. Larry Bird, reading the play perfectly, intercepted the pass near the baseline. In that chaotic millisecond, most players would have frozen. They would have called for a timeout. They would have tried to secure the ball safely. Dennis Johnson did none of those things. The instant he saw Bird had possession, he cut aggressively toward the basket. He did not wave his arms. He did not scream. He simply ran to where he was supposed to be. Bird, falling out of bounds, threw a pass over his shoulder. He threw it blind with no visual confirmation whatsoever. He threw it because he had complete trust that Dennis Johnson would be there. Johnson caught the ball and laid it in. The game was over. The Celtics won. Bird said afterward that he never doubted Dennis Johnson would be cutting. I knew he'd be there. Bird said simply, "This story encapsulates everything about why Bird elevated Dennis Johnson. It was not about statistics or individual performance or scoring numbers. It was about trust. It was about understanding. It was about two players who saw the game the same way and executed their roles with absolute perfection. This is why Bird consistently said that Dennis Johnson was the best player he ever played with. In the economy of winning, which is the only economy that matters in basketball, Bird and Johnson created something special. But to fully understand why all three of these legends agreed on Dennis Johnson, you have to look at his prologue before joining Boston. Dennis Johnson was not some unknown player when he arrived in Boston. He was already a champion. In 1979, Dennis Johnson led the Seattle Supersonics to the NBA championship. He was the finals MVP. He averaged 22.6 points per game in that final series. He averaged 6 rebounds. He averaged 6 assists. These are elite all-around numbers for a finals MVP performance. The significance of this cannot be overstated. DJ was not a role player who came to Boston to help Larry Bird win championships. He was a former finals MVP who had already proven he could win at the highest level. What is even more remarkable is his defensive dominance in that era. In the 1978 playoffs, Dennis Johnson set a finals finals record for blocks by a guard. He had 7 blocks in a single game. This demonstrated supreme athletic ability in his youth. Later, he would transition that athleticism into old man strength and savvy. He would use experience and positioning and basketball intelligence to achieve the same results. His time in Phoenix from 1980 to 1983 is often viewed as a failure because he clashed with coach John McLeod. But individually, Dennis Johnson was at his peak during those years. He earned all-star selections. He earned all NBA selections. The friction arose entirely from his demanding nature around winning and accountability. He pushed for excellence at all times. This is the full picture of Dennis Johnson. He was not a role player who came to Boston to help Larry Bird win championships. He was a former finals MVP. He was a player who had already proven he could be the alpha leader on a championship team. He came to Boston not out of desperation, but out of choice that Bird recognized as incredibly valuable. Bird saw someone with a proven winning pedigree and a commitment to excellence that matched his own perfectly. The chemistry between them was instant and undeniable. They understood each other without words. This is why Bird elevated DJ above all his other teammates. Bird knew he had found his basketball soulmate. So why did all 3 of these legends agree on Dennis Johnson so completely? The answer lies in specific attributes that made him absolutely unique and irreplaceable as a player. First was cognitive defense versus athletic defense, fundamentally. Most defenders in the late 1970s and early 1980s relied on raw athleticism and physical skills alone. They were fast, they were strong, they could jump very high. Dennis Johnson had all of those things naturally, but his real gift was his mind and basketball intellect. Magic Johnson noted that Dennis Johnson was one of the smartest men to ever play the game. What separated DJ was his ability to make defenders think and doubt their usual instincts. He studied film religiously. He understood tendencies. He anticipated moves before they happened. He forced opponents to second-guess themselves. This is what made DJ truly different from all other players. This kind of defense induces mental fatigue and exhaustion. When a point guard has to think about every dribble, when they have to account for every single option, when they know their instincts are being anticipated, it drains cognitive resources severely. Over a 48-minute basketball game, this matters tremendously. Dennis Johnson forced opposing point guards into a state where a mistake-free game was completely impossible. That was his calling card. That was his signature defense. What made this so devastating was that no opposing team could prepare for it effectively. They knew it was coming, but they still could not stop it. This is the mark of a truly elite defensive player. Second was physicality and durability combined in one complete package. Dennis Johnson was 6 feet 4 inches tall and weighed 185 pounds, but he played much heavier than that. He had strength that belied his size. He could guard post players effectively. He could hold his ground against taller guards like Magic. Over 14 seasons, he played 1,100 of 1,148 possible games. This availability was itself a skill. It meant that the opposing star never got a night off. It meant that the opponent could not wait for Johnson to get tired or leave the game. Johnson was always there, ready to compete. His durability was remarkable. Third was clutch performance and winning moments in the biggest games. The legends respected Dennis Johnson because he was a player who showed up when everything mattered most. He hit a crucial buzzer beater in Game 4 of the 1985 Finals against the Lakers. Throughout the late 1970s and 1980s, his teams consistently ranked in the top 3 in defensive rating. These are the wins that matter most. These are the moments that decide championships and legacies. Dennis Johnson delivered in all of them consistently and repeatedly. When the stakes were highest, he performed his best. But perhaps the most significant reason all 3 legends agreed was something deeper and more fundamental to who they were as competitors. Dennis Johnson represented a certain philosophy about basketball. He did not care about being the star. He did not care about leading the league in scoring or getting individual accolades. He cared about winning. He cared about excellence. He cared about demanding that level from everyone around him. For Bird, Magic, and Jordan, this philosophy was sacred and non-negotiable. They were all obsessed with winning and with surrounding themselves with people who had the same obsession and dedication to victory. This is the ultimate common ground and reason they all respected Dennis Johnson so greatly and uniformly. Dennis Johnson was not inducted into the Hall of Fame until 2010, 3 years after his sudden and unexpected death from a heart attack in 2007. This significant delay has become controversial in basketball circles and among analysts. Sports historians and analysts have called it an ongoing ongoing injustice. His complete resume was superior to many other inductees. Danny Ainge, who played alongside Dennis Johnson, called him the most underrated player of all time. The delay in his induction was likely due to his poor relationship with the media during his playing years. Dennis Johnson was surly with reporters. He was not warm or open with them. This probably cost him votes because Hall of Fame voting includes media members who might have held grudges or biases. The way Dennis Johnson was treated reveals a critical truth about how the media and public perception often diverge from player respect. The media did not appreciate DJ the way the players did. The box scores did not tell his story completely, but the players never doubted. The players always knew the truth. Dennis Johnson was the skeleton key to the entire 1980s. He unlocked the 1979 Sonics championship. He unlocked the Celtics dynasty when Bird needed him most. He locked down the Lakers when they might have won more titles. He shaped the entire decade's competitive landscape. Without Dennis Johnson, the history of basketball in the 1980s would be completely different. The Celtics likely win fewer titles. Magic Johnson might have won another championship or two. Jordan might have faced a weaker league. But that is not what happened because Dennis Johnson was there doing his job, caring about winning, and making everyone around him better. His impact transcended individual statistics or accolades. So the answer to the question posed at the very start is this: how good was Dennis Johnson? Good enough that Larry Bird, the greatest forward ever to play the game, said Dennis Johnson was the best he ever played with in his entire Hall of Fame career. Good enough that Magic Johnson, the most electrifying and dynamic offensive player of an era, said Dennis Johnson was the greatest defender he ever faced across his entire legendary career. Good enough that Michael Jordan, the most competitive and driven player who has ever lived, specifically targeted Dennis Johnson as the player he had to prove himself against. Good enough that three legends who almost never agreed on anything in basketball aligned completely and unanimously on Dennis Johnson's basketball greatness. When the greatest minds in basketball history speak with such clarity and agreement, people should listen carefully. Dennis Johnson's legacy teaches us that true greatness in basketball extends far beyond the statistics or the accolades or the media recognition. Dennis Johnson was not the flashiest player. His box score does not scream superstar. He was not an MVP. He was not a scoring champion. But in the final accounting of basketball history, he stands as the professional's professional. The player who did not care about the spotlight and attention. The player who only cared about the result of winning. And the result, always and invariably, was winning. That is how good Dennis Johnson was in the end. The world may have forgotten him. The media may have overlooked him. But the three greatest players of his era knew the truth. They knew who was truly great. Their validation speaks louder than any statistic or award ever could. Dennis Johnson is a reminder that the most important evaluation of a player comes from the competitors who faced him and the teammates who played alongside him. That is where true greatness lives. That is where the real respect exists. Statistics can lie. Media narratives can mislead. But the voices of the greatest players in history speak truth that resonates across the decades and through the ages. When Michael Jordan, Magic Johnson, and Larry Bird all agree on something, that agreement carries weight that cannot be denied or diminished by any other measure of success in basketball. If you appreciated this look at true greatness in basketball and competitive excellence, please like this video and subscribe to the channel because we talk about things that really matter in basketball history and legacy. Comment below and tell us who you think is the most underrated defender of all time in your opinion. Tell us what you learned from Dennis Johnson's story. Tell us how you evaluate players beyond statistics. Tell us about your favorite underrated players. Thanks for watching How Good Was Dennis Johnson today and always. That is the story of a champion. That is the story of Dennis Johnson, the best defender of his entire generation and era. Period. Full stop. End of story. Always ever. And that is the truth that will never be forgotten by those who truly understand basketball and the real meaning of greatness in the sport. Remember Dennis Johnson. His legacy will endure forever in basketball history and memory. He was the greatest defensive guard of all time. Period. Full stop. That's it. Always. Forever. End.